In this video, I will show you how to complete your Pixel Macrame DIY craft kit. Your kit will come with a wood dowel, hanging cord, macrame cord, different colored yarns, and a pattern sheet. You will also need a ruler and scissors. Step 1. Look at the bottom of your pattern sheet. Here it tells you how many cords you need to cut and how long you need to cut each cord. Cut your cords using a ruler. Every kit will have a different number of cords and lengths. Step 2. Attach the cords you just cut to your wood dowel using the Lark's head knot. Start with your first cord. Fold it in half. Lay the folded center part over the dowel. Then bend the folded center part behind the dowel. With the loop pointing downwards, pull the two ends of the cord through the loop. Tighten the knot, making sure both ends are even at the bottom. Do this to the rest of your cords until they're all attached to the dowel. Once you have all the cords attached to your dowel, center the cords and push them close together. This step isn't necessary, but I find it easier to tape the dowel to my table so it doesn't move around. The pattern is made up of rows and columns of little boxes. Each little box corresponds to the cords now hanging from your dowel. In this sun design, my pattern is 22 boxes wide, the same as the number of cords hanging from my dowel. Your pattern is also made up of different colored boxes. These colors represent the different colors of yarn in your kit. For this sun design, I have 3 different colors of yarn: blue, orange, and yellow. Your kit may have more or less colors depending on your design. Step 3. Now you can begin working on your pattern. You're going to start at the top left box of your pattern. Cut a piece of your starting yarn color. I recommend cutting a piece about 4 feet long to start. Use the vertical double half-hitch knot to add the colored yarn to your cords. To make a vertical double half-hitch knot, start with the tail end part of your yarn under the cord. Make a loop over the top of the cord, pointing towards the right. Then feed the yarn under the cord and up through the loop. Hold the tail end of your yarn so it doesn't undo the knot you just made. Push your knot to the top of your cord so it sits right under the Lark's head knot. I use one hand to tighten the knot and one hand to hold the cord straight. Make the same knot again on the same cord. Tighten the yarn and push it right under your first knot. Also tug lightly on the tail end to get rid of any slack. I like to use my fingernail to push the knot up. Don't cut your tail ends or make them too short. You'll need them later on. Now the first box on your pattern is complete. Working from left to right, you are going to repeat this knot. Always start with your yarn underneath your working cord. Do the same knot twice for each box. Continue to push up the knots with your fingernail so they sit right under your Lark's head knot. As you work through the first row on your pattern, make sure to tighten the cord on your dowel before adding the yarn. You also want to make sure your cords are close enough together. For the design to look as neat as possible, you don't want any big gaps between the cords. Continue until the first row of your pattern is complete. Once your first row is complete, it should look like this. Make sure the row is straight. You can use a ruler and your fingernail to move any knots up or down. After each row, I like to use a highlighter or marker to cross out the row so I can keep track of where I am in the pattern. For the second row, you'll continue making the same vertical double half-hitch knots, except you will need to do it in the opposite direction since we're now working right to left. Start with the yarn under the cord, then make the loop towards the left, and feed the yarn under the cord and up through the loop. Tighten and repeat a second time. Continue making vertical double half-hitch knots across the second row. You will need to switch yarn colors as specified in your pattern. For this sun design, my pattern has a yellow square on the 15th column. That means on the 15th cord, I need to use yellow yarn instead of blue yarn. I like to flip up the cord that needs a different color of yarn, so I don't accidentally use the wrong color. To add a new color, attach the yarn the same way you did your first color. When you're working from right to left, like I'm doing here, you'll need to work in the opposite direction, with the short tail end to the right and the loop to the left. Make sure to hold the tail end so the knot doesn't unravel. Tuck the tail end behind so it's out of your way. The next cord needs to be blue. To switch back to blue, I need to put the blue yarn under any cords, but over the yellow yarn. You will do this whenever you need to switch colors. Just remember, yarn always goes under cords, but over other colors of yarn. Like the other knots, make sure the blue yarn starts underneath the working cord before making your knots. Sometimes you need to lightly tug the cords or yarn you just wove your working yarn through to get rid of any slack. According to my pattern, my 8th cord needs to be yellow. I put my yellow yarn under any cords but over other colors of yarn. I make sure my yarn starts under my working cord before making my knots. Here you can see I'm switching to blue again by putting the blue yarn under the cord and over the yellow yarn. You will need to do this frequently as you work through the rows of your pattern. You might have 3 or more colors of yarn that you'll need to switch off using. Just remember to always put the yarn under any cords but over any other colors of yarn. Every row you will switch off the direction you're working. On odd rows you will work left to right, and even rows you will work right to left. Once a color of yarn is too short, you need to attach a new strand of yarn. Make sure to attach the yarn correctly for the direction you're working, and tuck the tail end behind so it's out of the way. If you make a mistake, no big deal. It's super easy to fix. Here I realized I did blue on a cord when it should have been orange. Use your fingernail or a pen to loosen the knots. Make sure to undo both knots on each cord. Switching colors gets trickier when the yarn is on the same side that you're working towards. Like in my sun pattern. I need the yellow yarn, but it's on the left side of my working cord, and I'm working towards the left. Like always, I put the yellow yarn under the cords and over any other colors of yarn. But when I get to the working cord, I don't start with the yarn under it. Tie the knot as if you're already under the cord, as I'm doing here. Adjust and tug the cords and yarn so there's no slack. When you get to the last row of your pattern, if your yarn won't make it all the way across the row, cut a new piece of yarn. This will help ensure there's no gaps so your work looks as neat as possible. Step 4 is to flip your finished piece over. All the tail ends of your yarn should be hanging out the back. To make sure the knots don't unravel, go through and tie 2 tail ends together at a time using a simple double knot. You might have to double up on some of the tail ends if there isn't an even number. When you're finished tying your knots, cut off the excess yarn. Step 5. Trim the cords to whatever length you want. Here I'm using a ruler and marker to help cut the cords straight. You can leave the cords as they are or unravel and brush out the strands. Here I'm using a macrame brush, but a pet brush also works great. You can also use a hairbrush or comb, although those might take longer. Step 6. Attach the hanging cord. In some of your kits, I taped the ends of the hanging cord so it wouldn't unravel, but as you can see here, that was a mistake. If you have taped ends, I recommend cutting above the tape instead of fighting to get it off, and I definitely won't be taping the ends in the future. There are a few different ways you can attach the hanging cord to the dowel. You can knot the rope, like I'm doing here. If you do this, I recommend gluing the knot. You can use Elmer's glue, tacky glue, or best of all, hot glue, so the knot doesn't unravel. You can then cut and brush out the ends to add an extra design element. Or you can cut the ends short and hide them using glue. Another option is gluing the hanging cord directly to the dowel. Here I'm first wrapping the ends with masking tape. I recommend doing this to make gluing easier. After the cord is taped, cut the taped end so there's only a small section of taped cord. Glue the taped ends of the cord to the back of the dowel. Here I'm using tacky glue, but hot glue also works great. Now it's time to hang and enjoy.